I have the pleasure of talking to you about the 2012 implementation plan. Some, but perhaps not all of you will have seen this publication at the beginning of February. And if we go to the next slide, what I want to do before I get into the nitty-gritty of the focus for 2012 will be just to remind you of the objectives and the scope of measures. And it complements very well the remarks from June Rain, because in many ways the objectives and the scope of the measures are the flip side of the areas for opportunity highlighted by the survey 5-6 years ago. I'll then go on and talk about the prioritisation criteria that were applied by the management board of the agency in collaboration with heads of medicines agencies, and then we'll focus on the specifics of what will be delivered this year. Next slide, please. So I think it is highly relevant to the prioritisation discussion, but I just wanted to bang the drum, if you like, for the fact that we're talking about pharmacovigilance legislation today, but we need to also remember that we need to drive up the quality of regulatory sciences and the scientific basis upon which decisions are made, as well as ensuring that sufficient resources are available for pharmacovigilance and public health protection, be those financial resources, human resources, expertise, and access to data, for example. So these are important, the three important pillars for protection and promotion of public health. Next slide, please. Now, just one slide on background. You all know this, I think, but just to put into context the implementation, this legislation has been coming for a long time. The project really started at the end of 2003 from the European Commission, and the initiation of the survey or the investigation into the European system for pharmacovigilance that June Rain referred to. The legislation was finalised and adopted formally through the co-decision process and published at the end of 2010. And most of the measures will apply from this July. And there are some specific provisions which mean that certain provisions come in later, particularly ADR reporting to the European Medicines Agency only, PSUR reporting, periodic safety update reporting, to the EMA only, and the pharmacovigilance system master file, where there are specific transitional provisions in the legislation. Next slide, please. Very, very closely aligned with the weaknesses highlighted by June, what are the objectives of this whole legislative project? It is to promote and protect public health by reducing the burden of adverse drug reactions and optimising the use of medicines. So it's about ensuring we have clear roles and responsibilities for those who have a legal role in pharmacovigilance, and very closely linked to that, ensuring we have robust and rapid EU decision-making, which particularly for nationally authorised products at a European level has in the past not always been as fast or as optimal as we would like. It's about engaging patients and healthcare professionals in the process. Historically, often a rather closed regulatory process which has not fully engaged with the most impacted stakeholders of all, patients and healthcare professionals. Having a more science-based approach, including the integration of benefits and risk where appropriate, making pharmacovigilance regulation risk-based and proportionate, so rather than having the same rules for all products, regardless of the risks they pose or how well established their safety profile might be, let's put our efforts and the efforts of industry where risks or uncertainties about risks are greatest. Increased proactivity in planning, particularly the proactive nature of risk management planning, as well as reducing duplication and redundancy in the system. And this is about stronger coordination of European pharmacovigilance with the European Medicines Agency at the hub of that coordination process. Finally, and really importantly, increased transparency and better communication on medicines. Next slide, please. Now, many of you have seen this slide before, but just before we start talking about prioritisation, let's just remind ourselves very quickly of the scope of this legislation. And this doesn't give any detail at all, but just on one slide, this outlines the broad scope of this legislation, which really is life cycle of medicines rather than narrow focus pharmacovigilance. So firstly, strengthen coordination at a European level, and linked to that the lists or dictionaries of medicinal products established at a European level, and we have a specific agenda point on that today from Sabine Brosch, the Article 57 provisions. Marketing authorization requirements, particularly the move from a detailed description of a pharmacovigilance system to companies having a pharmacovigilance system master file. Risk management plans for all new products and new legal basis for risk management plans when needed for products already on the market. A clear and strong and enforceable legal basis for post-authorization studies, both safety and efficacy. Responsibility to measure the effectiveness of risk minimization by the regulators and industry. Changes to adverse drug reaction reporting, including patient reporting, being formally introduced in all member states. A new legally recognized responsibility for signal detection by the industry, by the national regulators and by the European Medicines Agency. Profound changes in terms of periodic safety update reports, both in terms of format and content, but also in the process for assessing these reports and ensuring that the outcomes lead directly to regulatory action. The establishment of the Pharmacovigilance Risk Assessment Committee and the strengthening of the coordination group for mutual recognition and decentralized products. Transparency and communication, including the web portals, national and European web portal, the coordination of safety announcements, and the marked increase in transparency relating to the outputs from the different committees. Coordination of inspections, not just pharmacovigilance inspections, but all of the GXMP inspections, and the strengthened coordination at a European level. Pharmacovigilance audits for member states, for the European Medicines Agency and for industry, and in time, fees charged for pharmacovigilance at a European level and payments made for assessments and services provided to ensure that resources really are available for excellent public health promotion and protection. Next slide, please. If we then look at the impact, you will have seen this in many documents, but I never tire of reminding ourselves that this is the biggest change to the legal framework for human medicine since 1995. This is not a small 2012 implementation project. It is a major change project which will take a number of years, and it impacts on the entire product life cycle, particularly focused on peri-authorization and post-authorization. Next slide, please. So let's just look at the prioritization and the implementation plan for 2012. There is a need to prioritize. We have at the European Medicines Agency a fixed amount of resource, and we have to focus on where we can make the biggest difference with the resource that we have. We also have to work as smartly as we can, and we've put a lot of effort already with the member states into re-engineering certain processes to increase their efficiency so that we can get more public health protection out of the staff and the financial resources that we have. But within the prioritization exercise, we have given first priority to those activities with a direct impact on public health. Secondly, we've prioritized transparency and communication activities. And thirdly, those simplification activities, which is primarily simplification for the industry in terms of reducing duplication in reporting. So things like the ADR reporting, the PSUR reporting to a single site, etc. Next slide, please. So just in terms of how the implementation plan is organized, it's really organized around the pharmacovigilance process. So collection of key information on medicines, better analysis and understanding of data and information, regulatory action to safeguard public health, and communication with stakeholders. Next slide, please. If we then go to the first of those four areas, collection of key information on medicines, this is focusing on what will be delivered in 2012 by the network. There's a particular focus on what will be delivered by the European Medicines Agency, but obviously all of this is in collaboration with the Member States, the European Commission, and in consultation with stakeholders. So in terms of risk management plans, the new strengthened procedure for requesting, assessing, and then linking to the annexes to the marketing authorization of risk management plans will be established this year. It will then be put into operation starting in the summer. In terms of periodic safety update reports, the new procedure for centrally authorized products will be put into operation this summer. And we will also prepare harmonised lists of periodic safety update reports and publish those lists of birth dates to support submission. And Ulva Spooner will be giving a more detailed presentation on that later on in terms of the Good Pharmacovigilance Practice module. But maybe just a comment to say that we will be going out to public consultation on draft lists later on in the next couple of months. Whether that's April or May, we're not quite sure yet, but that is the aim. So for those of you who want to know what's happening about the publication of these birth date lists, there will be public consultation. Next slide, please. What about continuing with collection of key information on medicines post-authorization studies, the implementation of the post-authorization safety studies, the new procedure for protocol approval and results management for centrally authorized products will be introduced this year. And we will also consult on scientific guidance for post-authorization efficacy studies. And I know that there's a lot of interest, particularly from the industry, on this guidance. And we are working closely with the European Commission because, as many of you will know, there's also a delegated act in the legislation for the Commission relating to post-authorization efficacy studies. Mentioned already, but the electronic submission of core medicines information by pharmaceutical industry and start of validation of the information received, so that's the Article 57 requirements. In the coming days, we will be making public a revised legal notice and detailed guidance. Those of you who are interested or impacted by that, it will be coming, as I say, in the coming days. Next slide, please. If we then move on to better analysis and understanding of data and information and look at eutrovigilance and signal detection, the operation of the revised signal detection process for centrally authorised products will be operated by the European Medicines Agency in collaboration with the committees and rapporteurs. Support to member states to operate the new EU signal detection process for nationally authorised products will start this summer, and a pilot is already underway, working very closely with the Pharmacovigilance Working Party to make sure that we're ready this summer to distribute information from the eutrovigilance database to the member states for their signal detection process for nationally authorised products. The signal management process, so the next step after the detection of a signal, will start with the Pharmacovigilance Risk Assessment Committee this summer. Now, the eutrovigilance system, we don't have the funds available in 2012 for major development work, but we will continue the maintenance work of the current eutrovigilance system, including the ongoing work on data quality, which is conducted via a contractor. In addition to that, and we'll have an update from Sarah Weatherly this morning, implementation of web publishing of adverse reaction data further to the eutrovigilance access policy is also going to be a focus this year. Next slide, please. If we then move on to the third area, regulatory action to safeguard public health, absolutely critical will be the establishment of the new committee, the PRAC, Pharmacovigilance and Risk Assessment Committee, as well as establishing the revised mandate of the CMDH, the Coordination Group for Mutual Recognition and Decentralised, which is reinforced and has a really important decision-making role under the new legislation for nationally authorised products. In terms of strengthening the referral procedures, the new urgent union procedure, which is the replacement for the old Article 107 referral, will start this summer and will be one of the, I think, public health highlights of our implementation this year. In terms of additional monitoring, these are the slightly complex legal provisions relating to new medicinal products and products where there are requirements or conditions with the marketing authorization, which is linked to labelling changes, ADR reporting by patients and healthcare professionals, and then inclusion on a public list of products subject to traditional monitoring. We will be publishing the first list of medicines falling under that additional monitoring status this year, probably in the autumn. We will also be working with the network particularly, but also where appropriate with stakeholders to finalise business requirements for enhanced IT systems, thinking particularly of eutrovigilance and a PSUR repository, but not exclusively those two. And that work will progress during this year. So that's about business requirements rather than actually building the enhanced functionality. Next slide, please. And then if we go to the last area, communication with stakeholders, This will happen this year, so online publishing of information, publication of the CHMP and the PRAC agendas, minutes, recommendations and opinions. This is a real step change in terms of the level of transparency which you can expect starting from the summer. Coordination of safety messages. You'll be aware that the European Medicines Agency already coordinates safety announcements for centrally authorised products and for formal legal referrals to the agency. The legislation requires us to do the same for announcements for nationally authorised products made by the member states. Now, this is in a way quite challenging, particularly to differentiate between, on the one hand, a safety announcement, and on the other hand, just normal processes of transparency. But we will start the new process this year, particularly focusing on timetables for announcements by the member states, rather than particularly generation of the messages at a central on a central basis here at the agency. Finally, public hearings. Lots and lots of interest in public hearings, and we've had presentations at previous stakeholder meetings. We will be introducing this novel concept of public hearings in the frame of the urgent union procedure this year. Whether there is a suitable referral that actually will lead to a public hearing is a separate question, but we will be ready to go in the autumn should we have the appropriate referral which is of interest to stakeholders to lead to a public hearing. Next slide, please. And finally, this afternoon particularly is very focused on guidance and some of the details of operating the processes starting in the summer, but there's a lot more work to be done, both in terms of listening to your feedback from the consultation to the first wave of modules of good pharmacovigilance practice modules, but also in terms of finalising for public consultation the second wave of modules, which will be coming out just before the summer. So we will concentrate resources onto that guideline development process. Next slide, please. So I think to give a headline in terms of the status of where we are currently on target to deliver on the implementation plan as published at the beginning of the month. We are also committed to intensifying our communication with you, not necessarily with more stakeholder meetings. We plan to have 2 more this year, but more in terms of press releases, information on the website and so on, to give you regular updates about where we are on the implementation programme. I think the next slide is, okay, so just to conclude, excellent public health promotion and protection needs high quality science, robust law and adequate resources. And I think certainly those of us who are very, very involved in this implementation process are confident that the new EU legislation on pharmacovigilance will, in time, deliver for health promotion and protection. Thanks very much indeed. If we just go to the last slide then. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed. And so, Dr. Arlett, Peter, you've reminded us of the enormous scope of what lies ahead of us, and that prioritisation is inevitable, but that prioritisation on public health issues is the appropriate way forward. I'm sure as you're thinking of the questions you'd like to ask, because I think we should have some questions now, you'll have noticed, like me, the number of times, Peter, you've said this summer. And I looked at some of my colleagues who know that there's a lot of writing still to do of good vigilance practice. And we've also welcomed your comment about keeping the communications flowing and having at least another 2 meetings with stakeholders. So, and if you take a deep breath, there's also the Olympics. So this is an Olympic in itself. So let's open out to discussion. Any comments, remarks or questions? And could I ask colleagues, I know Mrs. Westerrow doesn't need any introduction, but if you could just give your name and affiliation. Thank you.
Barbara Westerholm, representing European Older People's Platform, AGE. I'll limit myself to one question here now, and that is how about the collaboration with the WHO Drug Monitoring Center? Are you going to forward the reports here? Are you going to evaluate what is being here and what they get from countries outside the European Union?
Thank you very much, Barbara. A very important question as we seek to maximise the value of the ADR systems that are being strengthened. And I wonder if Peter would like to pick up that question.
Thanks, happy to. Yes, I think it's important to emphasise that the collaboration with WHO headquarters in Geneva, but also the Uppsala Monitoring Centre for adverse drug reaction reporting is already very strong. The legislation foresees two particular areas of collaboration in the future. Firstly, that when decision-making is taken, that there is early communication with WHO so that WHO can be a conduit to inform other regulators around the world, particularly those regulators that are very closely linked in with WHO. That is already established, in fact, but we will ensure that that continues smoothly during the transition period. The second area is about adverse drug reaction reporting specifically. And the legislation states that after the transitional period, in other words, once member states and industry report to Vigilance only, all European case reports that come into the European Medicines Agency, in other words, to the Vigilance database, will be rapidly forwarded to the World Health Organization. And for that, we understand Uppsala Monitoring Centre on behalf of WHO. That is only after a transitional phase, because for the next couple of years, I think really the status quo about the flow of information from industry and national competent authorities to both Vigilance will continue. And the legislation actually foresees that the forwarding of case reports to WHO will only kick in after the centralisation process. And actually, one of the important messages, and I think the member states are very well aware of this, but is that member states need to continue, as now, to be sending their national case reports to Uppsala during those transitional couple of years.
Thank you. And I think, picking up on Peter's last point, there is much that happens now that makes sure that we benefit from WHO activities, including review of the signals detected at the regular Pharmacovigilance Working Party. So this is building on good collaboration as we go forward. Other questions, please? I wonder if, Peter, you want to say anything. I rather naughtily referred to the Olympics. I mean, there is a lot going to be coming up at a time that's very busy for all of us. And I know that EMA has some very well-advanced plans to make sure that business does continue, and business of the Pharmacovigilance Working Party too. Peter, would you like to just give an orientation on that?
I mean, very briefly. We are told by the authorities in London, the police in London, the security authorities in London, that the Olympic period running from July to mid-August and then again during the Paralympics will be very, very concentrated in this area. Many of the delegations from around the world will be in hotels in the Canary Wharf area. And there are concerns about overload of simple things like web access, as well as no hotel rooms, as well as no availability on public transport. Because of that, this agency will be in business continuity mode during the Olympic period, and then, if you like, on business continuity light mode during the Paralympics. And it just happens to coincide with the date of application of the new legislation on pharmacovigilance. So we've worked closely with our partners in the network and with the support of the BfArM. The last Pharmacovigilance Working Party will take place in Bonn in July, which will be a very interesting and very important meeting, particularly in terms of business, making sure that those issues that can be closed are closed, and those that aren't being closed have got a clear plan to transition into the new framework and the new committee. And also, we've been working with our colleagues at the Commission for the inaugural meeting of the PRAC, the Pharmacovigilance Risk Assessment Committee, which will take place in Brussels immediately following the Pharmacovigilance Working Party in July. So for those colleagues that will be going to both, we'll be jumping on the train in Bonn and going down to Brussels for the first PRAC meeting. It is likely that unless there is urgent public health issues to be dealt with at the July meeting of the PRAC, that it will mainly focus on procedural issues, including adoption of rules of procedure, chairmanship, and so on. And then the more process-related activity of the PRAC will then start in earnest at its September meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Colleague over on the left here, please give us your name and affiliation. Thank you.
Isabel Clamou, European Federation of Pharmaceutical Industry. I would have one question regarding the urgent union procedure. The European Commission has recently issued its revised draft proposal for the directive and the regulation, which will change the scope of the urgent union procedure. And I would have maybe the question to the European Commission on how this will be taken into account, and notably with respect to the date of implementation. If the directive is hopefully adopted before July 2012, that would be nice, but if unfortunately will not be the case, how would this be handled? How would that affect the PRAC activities in the first meeting, for instance? That would be quite a...
Yes. Thank you very much. An important question, and shows that everybody's very much on the ball. Delighted that you've raised it. It could be something that's picked up now by our Commission colleague, or would you like to address it when you're speaking, Florian? Pick it up now. An orientation on common position, and then will there be a catch-up for the urgent union procedure?
Yes, it's correct that the Commission made new proposal to slightly amend the pharmacovigilance legislation following a so-called stress test we made for the new legislation after a pharmacovigilance incident in one of the member states. And there we identified 2-3 gaps which we think would be useful to address. And therefore we published this very targeted amendment to some of the pharmacovigilance rules, and one of the topics is indeed the urgent union procedure in Article 107I. And yes, this proposal is currently subject to the deliberations of the legislator, i.e. the Council and the European Parliament. So I can't really give any indication how long this will take. The only thing which will probably speed up the deliberation is that the proposal has been split or separated from the information to patient proposal. But yeah, for the pharmacovigilance part, the rapporteur, for example, from the European Parliament has just been appointed, so we don't really know how long it takes. But it will in no way affect the adoption and implementation of the current rules.
Thank you very much, Florian. So the key message for us today is that the current proposals that are coming in on the 2nd of July for the urgent union procedure proceed as anticipated. Any other questions? I know that there's a lot of material in Peter's talk, a lot of up-to-date information there, and assuming that colleagues will all be able to see the slides after the meeting and think about them. They'll be made available, Peter, is that right?
Absolutely.
Yes,
right. Yeah.
yes.
All posted on.
Okay, please, colleague here.
Christelle Anke-Traxler from ASGP, the Association of the European Self-Medication Industry. I have a question with regard to the transition period or transitional measures for the transmission of non-serious suspected adverse reactions. The legislation foresaw that this provision was clearly linked to EUDRA-vigilance to minimize duplication and redundancies and having the report going everywhere. However, the legislation also added a provision which states that the member states may request such reporting. At the meeting in October, Peter informed us that the EMA had asked the HMA for their position on that provision. I would like to have an update on this to know if any member states are actually planning to request this reporting in the transitional period before EUDRA-vigilance is functioning. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. So this is a question about the transition for non-serious adverse drug reaction reporting, and it would be good to take this now as it's fresh in colleagues' minds. So can I ask Peter, please, to give an update?
Yes, thanks for the question, and it is an important area because if there's going to be change, people need to know about it. I don't have a formal announcement of which member states are taking what position relating to non-serious reporting, but I can tell you that we did a survey of the member states just before Christmas. The vast majority of member states will not be requesting non-serious reports. a very small number of member states are considering it, but until they announce that that's their final position, it isn't their final position, if you like. So I think it's an orientation today that a small handful of member states are considering non-serious reports during the transitional period, which is clearly a potential in the legal text that certain member states can, if they consider that that's necessary. What I can also say is that because the transitional measures were put in place in part to give time to ensure that the Eurovigilance system is fully functional with all of the functionalities required by the member states, particularly for their pharmacovigilance activities. If there is any non-serious reporting, if you like, new non-serious reporting requested by specific member states, that will be done at a member state level rather than through the Eurovigilance system. Thank you.
Clearly, some of these topic areas would be very useful for the type of communication to and fro that Peter, you highlighted, and so perhaps as we go forward through today we'll be thinking of Q's and A's and so forth that might be really helpful. Obviously not everyone can attend or link into this meeting, though I do believe there's quite a few who are linked on via electronic systems.